Welcome back to In Response EDH. As always, I'm your host Albert, and I'm glad you can join us for another great Commander gameplay video. On today's episode, we have a new member of the group joining us, Brad, and today he'll be playing Slicer, Hired Muscle. This deck is a nasty Voltron and Stacks build. It runs a bunch of fast mana and mean artifacts like Static Orb and Trinisphere to make sure his opponents can't officially cast spells, or even play the game for that matter, and equipment like Sword of Feast and Famine to allow him to untap all his lands and still be able to cast his spells. Next we have Mike back, and he's decided to give his Enchantress deck, Tuvasa the Sunlit, another go. This deck wants to cast a ton of enchantments, like Shark Typhoon to make a shiver of flying sharks to beat his opponents down with, while drowning in card draw with enchantresses like Eidolon Blossoms, and eventually find the card he's best known for playing, Omniscience, to run through his entire deck and eventually finish us off. Up next, Chris is back with his human tribal deck, led by Saskia the Unyielding. This deck has already had some success on the channel, and is now back to try to add another one to the win column. He aims to make a huge board presence with any number of humans like Odric, Lunar Marshal, to give all his humans superpowers, and Shared Animosity to boost them up even more, and if that doesn't work, Combat Celebrant to give extra combat phases just in case the first one didn't finish you off. Last but not least, of course there's me, and I brought back my 5-colored partner deck of Mike and 11. This deck leans heavily into 11's ability to cast spells for free, so I want to draw as many cards as possible by paying a bunch of life with cards like Sylvan Library, or having a Consecrated Sphinx around to draw a ton of cards when my opponents draw cards, and once I have 11 or more cards in hand, that's when the real fun starts, and I start casting big spells like Expropriate off of 11's attack ability. Before we get started, we would like to remind you, if you enjoy our content and would like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron. When you do, you're not only contributing to the channel's growth, but you're also being entered in our monthly giveaways, as well as receiving patron-only perks. All proceeds of our Patreon are reinvested back into the channel to bring you the best content possible. We would also like to thank our sponsor, Dragon Shield. Hit the link in the description of this video to check out the best product out there to protect your cardboard. You can also support the channel by using our affiliate link when purchasing product and singles at TCG Player. With that said, and the introductions out of the way, let's start the game. Chris wins the die roll this time and leads us off by playing a tapped Overgrown Tomb. Brad then plays a mountain and taps it to cast a Gamble.
Oh god, already things are getting stupid.
I don't know what I should be expecting out of this place.
I don't either.
I think it's like he's gonna rock us like with shit. Like I don't know what it does.
I don't know what it does, but it's gonna be terrible.
It's gonna rock us.
Yeah.
Brad has Chris choose a card to discard at random. He then does the table a huge favor and discards a Jessica Thrice Reborn. After that, he passes to Mike. Mike then draws a card and just plays a tapped Sparrow's Headquarters. I then start my turn and just play a tapped Stomping Ground. After that, I pass to Chris. Chris draws for turn and plays a Plains. He then taps both lands to cast Eldamri's Call, and chooses to search up General Kudro of Draneth to his hand. Brad then draws and casts the card he searched for with Gamble, a Mana Crypt. He then plays another mountain and goes to cast his commander for its more than meets the eye cost, Slicer, High Speed Antagonist. He then moves to combat and swings at Mike for 3 commander damage. At the end of combat, he converts it to Slicer, Hired Muscle, and then passes the turn. And on Mike's upkeep, Brad gives him control of Slicer.
So you're going to start tearing apart other people via me.
Well, you'll
Got it.
He then plays a Savannah as his land for turn. He then taps the Headquarters for blue to cast Mystic Remora. After that, he goes to combat and swings Slicer at me for 6 commander damage. After that, he ends his turn.
the end of your turn.
Yep, I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give it to me. Alright, draw. I start my turn by playing an Ancient Tomb, and then tapping 3 mana to cast a Cultivate, taking 2 from the tomb. I then choose to search up an island to the field tapped, and a Plains to my hand. I can't pay the Remora tax, and Mike gets to draw a card.
It's too bad that you discarded Jessica.
Is that what you went for?
Huh?
No,
That
I
was-
think you
No,
went for
that's not what I
the
went for.
mana
I went for the
crypt.
mana crypt.
Yeah.
But that helps. Like that was
Yeah.
going to go. You were going to cast that soon. Yeah.
Yeah. The game would have been over my next turn if you didn't discard it.
Next I go to combat and swing Slicer at Mike, giving him 9 commander damage. I am done.
Yeah, so you can skip to him.
Neat.
See, but now you've created a snowball effect because now only one of now you see what's going to happen because you attacked me and you didn't spread it out. He's going to hit you or me, and now we're going to get ramped up. Then he's going to hit you or me again.
True.
You realize if he hits you, I might just hit you.
Or he can hit you and then he can hit you. And then you're
This
just
is
out.
and that is true, and he's already gone after me. So yep. You control. So is that 15?
Dang.
Yeah.
15.
This is fun, everybody.
I don't even play anything. Here you go.
Brad then draws for turn and plays another mountain. He then goes to combat, swinging Slicer at me for another 6 commander damage. After that, he ends the turn and gives Slicer back to Mike. Mike starts off his turn, paying a mana to keep the Remora around for another turn. And I remind Brad about his missed mana crypt roll. Mike then plays a Hall of Heliod's Generosity, followed by casting an Aegis of the Gods, which gives him hexproof, but more importantly, a blocker.
And then I'll attack Chris.
Me?
Yeah, because I don't want him to win from this.
What do you mean?
I know, can we get one
Can someone remove it or do something with it?
piece of removal?
I will end.
I mean, I think
Keep
he's
passing
neat.
it.
Is you want it to him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need to give it to you, right?
Low violence.
Dude, if he wins off of just this, like my deck's not really equipped to handle something like this.
That's the point.
I then decide to tap out, taking 2 to cast one of my commanders, 11 the Mage. Next I go to combat and swing the Slicer at Chris. After that, I go to end my turn, but on my end step, Chris flashes in an opposition agent. Chris then starts his turn and takes control of Slicer. He then plays a command tower as his land drop, and then chooses to go into combat, swinging Slicer at Mike, who quickly chumps with the Aegis of the Gods. After that, Chris ends his turn, and Brad gets his commander back. Brad then draws for turn, and drops down another mountain. He then remembers to roll for the mana crypt, winning it and avoids taking any damage. Next he taps 5 to hardcast a Fury. When it enters, he chooses to deal 2 damage to the opposition agent and 2 to my 11. This kills off Chris's agent, and now that he's open, Brad goes to combat and swings Slicer at him. In response, Chris casts a Settle the Wreckage to exile Slicer, and Brad goes searching for another mountain. With nothing else, Brad passes. Mike then starts his turn, letting the fish go to the graveyard, and draws for turn. He then plays a Flooded Strand as his land drop, and immediately cracks it, losing a life, to search up a tropical island to the field. After that, he casts a Jukai Naturalist, and with nothing else, he ends his turn. I then untap and draw, and play a Plains as my land for turn. Next I tap 4 mana, floating a colorless and taking 2 damage to cast my other commander, Mike the Dungeon Master. After that, I use my floating mana and a green to cast a Bloom Tender. I then apologize to Chris and swing my commander at him to lose a life and draw a card with 11. After that, I end my turn. Chris then draws his card and puts down a forest as his land drop. He then pays 3 to cast Chromatic Lantern, then taps another 3 to cast General Kudro. As it enters, he exiles the Gamble from Brad's graveyard, and with nothing else, passes. Brad then draws and remembers to roll for the Crypt trigger. He wins it again and avoids taking any damage. He then plays another mountain, followed by paying 3 mana to cast Brotherhood's End, choosing to deal 3 damage to all creatures.
You attack?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Attack Albert.
Sure. He then moves to combat and swings his card at me, but in response, Mike channels Boseiju Who Endures to destroy it, and Brad goes searching for another basic mountain.
So, now
Well,
he
so
casts-
wait, did he take the 3 or no?
No.
Good man.
Sorry, I was brain farting before. I was like, "Are you gonna destroy Slicer?"
Mike then draws for turn and plays a very pretty Reliquary Tower. Next he taps 4 mana to cast Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. After that, he passes. I then draw for turn and play a less pretty Reliquary Tower as my land drop, followed by paying 5, thanks to the Grand Arbiter, to cast a Grim Hireling. Next I go to combat and swing 11 at Brad. He takes 3 and I lose a life and draw a card with 11. And then the Grim Hireling will trigger, making me 2 treasures. Chris then starts his turn, drawing a card, and paying 5 to cast Migration Path, to search up 2 basics to the battlefield tap. After that, he just passes to Brad. Brad then finally remembers to roll for the crypt before drawing his card, and wins yet another roll. He then starts off his turn casting Pyrokinesis, by exiling a red card from his hand and paying 1 extra mana, to deal 4 damage to Mike's Grand Arbiter Augustine. He then taps out to cast his commander, Slicer, for its more than meets the eye cost, and then goes to combat and swings at Chris for 3 more commander damage. At the end of combat, he converts it back to the front half and then gives it to Mike on his upkeep. Mike then draws for turn and then taps out to cast ᴍᴜᴅᴍᴇ. Next he goes to combat and swings Slicer at me. I choose not to block and take another 6 commander damage. On Mike's end step, Brad decides the fun's over and decides to keep Slicer for himself, and converts it back to the car side. I draw for turn and start off by casting Parallel Lives. Next I go to combat and swing 11 at Brad again. He goes up to 6 commander damage, and I lose a life and draw a card with 11. The Grim Hireling will trigger and make me 4 treasure tokens thanks to my Parallel Lives. On my second main phase, I recast Mike the Dungeon Master again, using 5 of my treasures. After that, I just pass. Kristen starts his turn, casting Tireless Tracker, and then plays a Dragon Skull Summit, and making a clue token with the tracker. Next he taps 5 mana to cast Watley, Warrior Poet. He decides to just use her 0 ability to create a 3/3 Dino token, and after that, passes back to Brad. Brad again rolls for the crypt, and still hasn't lost a roll. He then draws for turn, and goes straight to combat, swinging Slicer at Mike and paying for the ᴍᴜᴅᴍᴇ. On his second main phase, he casts a Damping Sphere. He then converts Slicer and passes to Mike, but since he won't be giving his commander away, he just converts it back to the car. Mike then starts his turn, casting an Arcane Signet. He then pays 4 mana, thanks to the Damping Sphere, to cast his commander, Tuvasa the Sunlit. With nothing else, he passes. My turn starts with me drawing a card and dropping down a luxury suite. I then decide to go to combat and swing at Brad again. He goes up to 9 commander damage, and I again lose a life and draw a card, but still don't have 11 cards in hand, so I cast a Chromatic Orrery on my second main phase to help out with that problem, and then remember to make an additional 4 treasures from dealing combat damage. Chris starts turn 8, drawing a card, and then tapping 2 to crack his clue and draw another card. The tracker sees it and gets a +1/+1 counter. He then plays a tapped Jungle Shrine as his land for turn, and makes another clue token. After that, he casts Catilda, Dawnheart Prime. Next he casts his commander, Saskia, the Unyielding, naming Brad as she enters. After that, he takes up Watley, to gain 4 life since the tracker is 4 power. After that, he passes. Brad starts his turn off by finally losing a mana crypt roll. He then starts off his turn, paying 3 mana to cast Defense Grid. He then moves to combat and swings at Mike again, paying 1 for the ᴍᴜᴅᴍᴇ. Mike can't take any more damage and chumps with his commander. After that, he passes. Mike draws for turn and plays a Mistgate Pathway, followed by casting Replenish to return all enchantments from his graveyard to the battlefield, those being Jukai Naturalist, Mystic Remora, and Aegis of the Gods. After that, he casts an Ancestral Mask, enchanting the Jukai Naturalist, making it a 12/12. On his end step, I crack my treasures and take 2 from the tomb to tap the orrery and draw 5 cards. I then draw for turn and cast a Mystical Tutor to search up a Ruinous Ultimatum to the top of my library. I then go to combat and swing 11 at Brad again, losing a life and drawing a card. Now that I have 11 or more cards, I cast the Ruinous Ultimatum for free, to destroy all non-land permanents I don't control. I choose not to pay for the Mystic Remora, and Mike draws a card, but I do pay an extra 1 because of the Damping Spear. The Ruinous Ultimatum will then resolve, and clears the board.
I think we got ourselves a game. That thing's too expensive now, right?
For now.
He's got 7 mana, possibly 8. Card to hand is 1.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think, I'm alive. I think I'm alive. It costs 9. Oh.
I do have, like, ways to get mana. So.
No, kill him, though. Right? He's at 9, right? You don't kill me next. He's your next target.
Shut up. Next, I tap the Orrery for 5 mana and 1 green to cast Bootlegger's Stash. I then tap 2 lands, forgetting that I had treasures, to cast a Reckless Fireweaver. So I do a Takesy Backsy and use the treasures instead. I then use the last 2 treasures and a land to cast a Tireless Provisioner. Next, I play a Polluted Delta, making 2 more treasures with the Provisioner. And when they enter, the Fireweaver will ping everyone twice. I then pay a life to sack the Delta and search up a land.
But why? Oh, I see why. It's gonna be gross. He's gonna make a bunch of them.
Bunch of what?
Treasures.
Oh.
So he's gonna hit it, it's gonna go bop bop, then he's gonna go dot dot bop bop. Every time I bopped was a treasure.
I decide to just get an island and make 2 more treasures, pinging everyone 2 more times. I then crack 2 more treasures to cast a Nature's Lore, searching up a Zagoth Trime to the field, creating 2 more treasures, and pinging everyone 2 more times. After that, I just pass to Chris. Chris then draws for turn and casts an Always Watching, followed by recasting his commander, Saskia, this time naming me.
God named Albert.
He then moves to combat and swings Saskia at Brad for 4 commander damage, and dealing 4 damage to me as well. Before he ends his turn, he plays a Sacred Foundry, tapped, and then passes.
Can we survive to kill Albert? Can you kill Albert?
Depends on what I draw.
Because we mostly us have nothing, and he mostly life has nothing. My English real good.
New word real good.
Brad then drops a Cavern of Souls on the field, naming robots as it enters. Not finding an answer, he just passes back to Mike.
Oh, I drew something.
He drew something.
Is it a farewell? That'd be sweet.
It's much worse than farewell.
Like, worse as in better, or worse as in worse?
Worse isn't bad for me.
No?
What?
Why do you have cards in your deck that are bad for you?
No, bad for... Shut up. I don't know what I'm saying right now. Casting Moat.
Moat.
And then I'm casting Talisman of Curiosity.
On Mike's end step, I tap some of my lands to make 6 more treasures, and ping everyone 6 more times. I then go to my turn, and Mike sees the writing on the wall.
But if you want, let me finish this out.
Go ahead.
You untap and then tap it.
Ready to roll.
You just untap and then you tap. We can't respond to the lands tapping.
I then tap all my lands, except for the Ancient Tomb, since I was afraid I would somehow deal damage to myself and Brad burn me out somehow. But then I make 16 more treasures. This should have finished everyone off, but since the life totals were incorrect, Chris survived at 1 life. So I just play a Scalding Tarn and make a couple more treasures, pinging him again, and winning the game. Well, Mike and 11 got there again. I really enjoy playing this deck since it's pretty high powered. Once I have some sort of extra card draw, it's only a matter of time before it runs away with the game. This game was very much arch enemy since we all just tried our best to survive against Slicer, so that helped me find the time I needed to assemble the pieces to finally close out the game. Brad's Slicer deck raced out of the gate really fast, and it really kept the table having to play the game very defensively since each one of us was only 1 hit away from dying to commander damage. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't find any useful spells to get himself back into the game. Mike was definitely affected this game by all the damage he was taking. His deck is much more suited for the late game and spending the first few turns just setting up his value pieces. The early aggression just kept him off his game plan too much to make any meaningful impact, except for when he saved me with ᴑᴜᴜ. So at least he kept Brad from winning, which I'm sure is a win in his book. Chris also struggled to get his game plan going this time. When he plays Saskia, He's normally the aggressor, but when he finally got to build a sizable board, it was wiped by the ruinous ultimatum. After that, it was pretty much over for him, despite taking me down to only 4 life. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment, and if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Before we go, we'd like to give a big thank you to our amazing patrons. We are glad to have your support and thankful for each and every one of you. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.